So, hi, and welcome back to Talking Therapy with me, Devraj. And this week I'm very excited to have on the line Mr. Stephen Kessler, who wrote an absolutely excellent book, a reworking of Reich's original character structure, I would call it. He may describe it differently, but I was so impressed with this book and how it brought this really useful that body of knowledge right into the 21st century. I've been advising all my clients and people who come on my courses to read it. So we're starting this series of kind of podcasts or video podcasts. I really wanted to ask Stephen, and he's very kindly agreed to come on. So big welcome to you, Stephen. And if you'd like to just introduce yourself and say a little bit about how you became a therapist and what you're into, please.
Sure. Thank you. Glad to be here. I'm glad that you're focusing on this material, and especially, sort of the lineage from Reich to where we are now. How I became a therapist is a very circuitous route. I started out in elementary school. I was really fascinated by physics. And then in high school, I began to notice, first of all, I began to go to the school plays. And I would go to the same play like 3 nights in a row, which was all we did them in high school. And I would watch and I would think, oh, they're having emotions I don't have. Something's not working for me. This is great. What's going on with me that I'm not having these emotions? And that started an exploration in me. And then, of course, when it came time to go to college, my parents were very much on the side of let's go study physics because you can earn a living. So I did that. I went to MIT and did a year there studying, first year stuff. You're not specializing yet. But I started out in the hard sciences. But I came with questions that you can't answer in the hard sciences. I came with questions about what is reality and what is truth and why are we here and like what are we doing, and I would ask my teachers and they'd say, Stephen, you can't answer these questions in science. Like this is you want to go to metaphysics for this or theology, but this ain't physics. And I also realized that I was not really wanting to become a physicist. It looked like, nuclear reactors and nuclear weapons, and that was about it. I thought, I'm not going to be happy with my life based on that. So I managed to transfer from MIT to the acting school at Boston University. My thinking was, okay, if matter and energy is not the fundamental stuff, because, physics is the priesthood of our basic religion here. Our religion is science. And physics is the priesthood, like where you go to get the real answers. But they didn't have the answers I wanted. So I thought, okay, maybe what's real is human emotion. And besides, I'm pretty screwed up. I could use some help with that. So maybe acting school will help. And I had done some acting in high school. I really liked it. So I did 4 years of acting school, which loosened me up, opened me up. Then 4 years in a theater company, which continued to open me up. And, my emotions actually finally came back online. I was pretty shut down to start with. And toward the end of that, I was realizing I'm never going to be a great actor. I'm just not that talented. I always knew I was not that talented. I mean, in acting school, it was clear who had the real stuff and who didn't. And most of us didn't. And I was not even at the top of the people who didn't. So I realized after 4 years in the theater company that I had done what I came to do. I had opened up my emotions. It had never occurred to me to go get therapy. I was a well-brought-up young man on the East Coast of the United States. You had to be crazy to get psychotherapy back then. So acting was the next best thing for me. But I realized I'd accomplished what I came for. and I didn't know what I wanted to do next. So I left the theater company and sort of traveled across country and had a vision quest without quite knowing what that was, and eventually sort of drifted into um, metaphysics and parapsychology and transpersonal psychology, which is where I finally got my master's degree and got licensed. So that's kind of how I became a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And I decided, in therapy, it's a new show every hour, and you get paid. You know? And in my career in acting, it was not a new show every hour. And I was never going to get paid that much. So that's kind of how I came into therapy.
Mm-hmm.
But I came in through embodying different kinds of people as an actor who was being cast in different roles and had to find out what's going on with this person. And the main thing I discovered by embodying different kinds of people was I discovered that everybody is doing the best they can. I'd been pretty judgmental before that. And this discovery shifted me, and I thought, well, even someone who's a real bastard, really mean and cruel, if you really get inside, they think this is the best option for them, which gave me much more compassion. I still didn't like the behavior, but. So that's the long answer to how did you get here?
Fascinating. And so you're now working as a transpersonal therapist, and how did you get into the characterology and this kind of thing, or how did your career as a therapist develop then over the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, there was grad school, and I was in therapy in grad school, and I was learning different things, and I was going to a lot of different workshops outside grad school, and trying out different spiritual paths and meditation practices and all that kind of stuff. Basically working on myself and trying to understand what's really going on here, guys. And in '87, I first began studying the Enneagram with Helen Palmer, which was my first map of personality. And it was a real eye opener for me, because I learned the thing we all learn with our first map of personality, which is, wow, other people are really different, or can be really different, and it's legitimate. They're not just wrong or stupid or something. They actually are experiencing the world differently. And Helen Palmer, who's a psychic, basically, so she could explore the inner experience of different people as she was reading them. So she had all that experience. So she taught this using examples from life, using live panels, but she taught it as different slant of attention, that this person has a different slant of attention. And I've taken that idea into habit of attention. And I still think that's the most important thing for us to understand about people in general, that a person's habits of attention mostly determine their experience in life.
Mm.
And that if you know your own habits of attention, you can begin to come out from that prison, and your attention can expand, and you can get out of only seeing the world through that particular lens.
Mm. Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. Yeah. I'm reminded how useful it is just to have these kind of maps, whatever they are, in a sense, or that there can be, when life is very, very jarring or scary or whatever, you can get the sheer difficulty in kind of understanding why someone is behaving towards you the way the way they are can cause a secondary level of kind of not necessarily traumatization, but weirdness or strangeness in it. This difficulty in understanding why someone is behaving towards you the way they are.
Yeah.
And so when we have these maps, and of course you can go too far with them and just sit around categorizing everyone brutally into some Enneagram or Myers-Briggs or whatever, but nevertheless they are very helpful to alleviate distress. Yeah. And to further understanding. And I've been really struck on occasions when I start to talk a bit about social psychology and behavior patterns and this kind of thing, just how people very quickly, just from normal, ordinary ways of not therapists or people especially interested in therapy, when presented with these kind of ideas, just how quickly they kind of engage with them just naturally, because they offer some way to understand some of the difficulties that we found in life when we're kind of thrown into a is it me or is it them kind of situation inside our own mind.
Yeah. Someone said to me, it's like having X-ray vision. You can see inside the person or inside yourself what's going on and why you're behaving or they're behaving the way they are. And that does a couple of things. It takes it away from the belief that it's about me. The more you can understand that they're motivated, this is the way this person habitually behaves when in distress. It's not really about me. So you get, it's not my fault. And you also get, it's not their fault in a real way. Mm. They're caught in a sort of prison. And they don't know they're in a prison. It's an invisible prison, but it's controlling their life. It's running their life. And to me, that's the most, or one of the most important things that a person can get out of learning this map of personality, is beginning to see what prisons you particularly are caught in and how to get out. And then, like you said, the more we can get out of the prison of attention, the more we can become present, which is the whole point, as far as I can tell. That's a much better state to be in.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So from there, how did you get to from what you were just talking about just before to
Helen and the Enneagram?
From the Enneagram to characterology?
So I was with Helen for, 5 years, and in the Diamond Heart School for 16, continuation of study of the Enneagram. And during that time, I had also been doing body work, which was really important in opening up and releasing chronic tensions in my body, character armor, muscular armor. And then the person here in Berkeley who had been my body worker for 15 years began teaching classes in working directly with energy, perceiving energy, using energy, learning to accumulate bigger energy in your body, learning to use that to make something happen in the world. And part of those classes was teaching about character structure, because when a person gets too much energy in their body, they go into overwhelm. They go into distress. They go into pattern. So I stopped the body work and began doing the classes with her, and quickly realized, this was like 15, 20 years ago, quickly realized that this was actually more relevant and more useful for me than the work I was doing in the Diamond Heart School. Mm. I felt like I had gone as far as I could with that school, not because of something going on with them, but because I needed to do some different work inside myself. Mm-hmm. First, I got some great stuff from that school. Mm. So I began studying an energy class and learning about perceiving energy. And I'm not, naturally a tremendously talented psychic person. I don't see auras and stuff like that. I wish I did.
Mm.
But it began to make a lot of sense for me, and that's how I first learned about character structure. And then as I applied it in my life and in my work with my clients, my therapy clients, I pretty quickly began to realize this is more useful than the Enneagram. And I had been a great proponent of the Enneagram for many decades, but I found this is just better, simpler, easier, clearer, more organic, that it actually comes from what's going on inside your body rather than abstract ideas.
Mm. Mm.
The safety strategies
Mm. Mm.
that we talked about.
Yeah, we mentioned that a little earlier, just before we started this recording. Mm-hmm. That maybe you want to just reiterate or speak a little bit about the book, and
yeah,
you mentioned about what you'd change now if you were rewriting it and this kind of thing.
Yeah, one of the main points that I make in the book is that these survival patterns, character structure patterns, arise out of safety strategies. They come from repeating safety strategies over and over again until they get conditioned into the body and become automatic and unconscious. In the book, I called them survival strategies. The one thing that I would like to be able to change about all those 10,000 copies I first printed is to change that phrase survival strategy to safety strategy. So if people buy the book, electronically now or print on demand from Ingram or Amazon or someplace, they'll get an updated copy that says safety strategies, but the first ones I printed still say survival strategies.
Mm.
But that's the main point for me, that everyone is seeking safety. We all want to feel safe. And as we feel unsafe, especially as children, babies, infants, toddlers, little kids, we try to figure out what we can do to feel safer. And these 5 safety strategies are 5 ways to try to feel safer, or at least not so vividly feel the distress, the lack of safety.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. Do you? I mean, one of the things I kind of drew from Lowen and Reich, and reading a little bit about their original concepts of this, was that the 3 of the patterns were kind of pre-egoic, to use Freudian terms, and that they would tend to leave you with a somewhat weakened drive or ego to go out in the world and do things. And the other 2, the rigid or the aggressive, were more kind of, in a sense, almost with the aggressive, a kind of payback drive almost to charge out into the world and maybe demonstrate status because they hadn't been given it adequately as a child or whatever. And with the rigid, this kind of functionality and more egoic structures. Do you see that in similar terms, or do you have a different take on it?
I see it. I language it differently.
Mm.
I would propose that ego is developing even in an infant, especially if you go into the world of object relations theory. You've got very early ego structures developing. Mm-hmm. The borderline, as I see it, is right around 2 years old. Mm-hmm. The time when will and strength come online. Mm. And the desire for autonomy comes online. Mm. And that's at about the time where enduring pattern / masochist pattern is beginning to develop, because autonomy is an issue. Mm. With an infant, with a nursing baby, autonomy is not that big a deal, right? The classic example is you have a 1-year-old toddler and they are up on their feet and they're headed somewhere, and you look ahead and you think that's not good, they're going to fall down the stairs. So you pick them up and you turn them, and they toddle off in the new direction.
Mm.
They're just going. They weren't going anywhere in particular. There wasn't an I choose that element. They're just like exploring, let's learn to walk.
Mm.
But somewhere around 2 years old, you pick them up and turn them, and they turn back.
Mm.
And the reason they turn back is now there's the beginning of an I am doing that.
Mm.
And if you turn me away, you are challenging my autonomy.
Mm. Mm.
And I will fight for my autonomy.
Mm. Mm.
And, we see that in adults and teenagers constantly.
Mm.
People will defend their autonomy, even if the choice that they're defending is just so bad.
Mm.
Like that's a really bad idea. You're going to end up, in an automobile wreck, or you'll get drunk, or you'll get raped, or, something bad will happen.
Mm.
But if the person feels, no, this is my choice, and, you're trying to take away my voice, they will defend their autonomy first and foremost.
Mm. Mm.
So I see the break point as determined more by when will and strength come online.
Mm.
And that the first two patterns, leaving and merging, skits and oral, aren't really concerned with leaving and strength. It's not online yet. Core is not really online.
Mm.
And you just begin to get that with the third pattern. And then it gets much stronger in fourth and fifth patterns. So same idea, different way of understanding it, or different emphasis on it.
Mm. Mm. It's almost like this age 2, we get access to this word no, and it's
exactly, which is an assertion of, my choice, right? It's the first time we get into no.
Yeah, fascinating stuff.
And it becomes, you watch a little kid, they begin to get this amazing joy out of just going, no, 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 no. I remember my sister-in-law telling me that with her son, she learned that she would offer him milk or orange juice, right? And she wanted him to drink milk as well as orange juice. But if she said milk or orange juice, he would always go for orange juice. And she learned that trying to argue with him about, it's important to drink some milk too. She just changed the language. She said, would you like orange juice or would you like moo cow juice? And so half the time he'd go for moo cow juice. He had decided he wanted juice. So trying to take away the juice was somehow a challenge to his autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
And she just relabeled it so it wasn't a fight, and he was drinking the milk she wanted him to drink.
Mm.
I thought that was a great example of, autonomy first. Who cares what the next choice is?
It's fascinating stuff, and I kind of, wonder to what depth these patterns continue. I think I've witnessed. I'm 60 years old now, and I think society has changed a lot since I was growing up in the UK. And the way we treat people is a lot different. There's less violence around here, certainly, and less. It seems that way. I move in different circles as well, but and less general kind of brutality. But I'm kind of what's intrigued me for a while is like the idea that culture and trauma, or culture and these kinds of invocation of safety strategies from parental techniques which may not be adequate, are kind of inextricably linked in a sense, and as we kind of develop better childcare practices in a way, which I think has happened over the course of my lifetime. So the adults change, and then there's a kind of intergenerational conflict that goes on, like the kind of baby boomers versus the millennials, if you're familiar with those kind of terms, and I wonder how much of that relates to character structure and to how kids are brought up these days. You know, I don't know. I don't know if you ever think about these kind of things at all, or if you have insights.
Yeah, I see two different issues here. One is simply um, just as the lap baby needs to leave the lap in the rapprochement stage, the teenager needs to leave the family and join the society of their peers in order to be able to leave home, which is, you know, a big, important developmental step. And it ain't easy. It's psychologically a very difficult separation. So we have the person as they grow going through several birth processes, several separation processes, right?
Mm.
You know, the physical birth, the psychological birth, separating from mom, at least the beginning of it, separating from the family. So it seems to me that for teenagers to be able to declare, I am not like you, my parents, I am different, is an important stage just in defining yourself. Now, it's not the end result. You know, just saying I am not you is a start, but you still don't know who you are. It's like you've got a picture frame, and inside the picture frame there are pictures of mom and dad and your aunts and uncles and, you know, your teachers and your priest or minister or rabbi or whoever you've got there, all the people who are important to you. And one way is you first say, I'm like them. I'm one of them. And then you get to be a teenager and you say, no, I am not any of them. And you start taking all their photos out of a picture frame. But eventually you're only left with an empty frame. You still have to find yourself. And that's crucial. You know, a lot of us don't quite make it, but it's a very important stage in life. So that's one piece. Teenagers have to be different in order to separate from the family. Okay. In terms of parenting changing and effect on kids, one of the things that I found in doing my research for this book, and I got most of this from Stephen Johnson's work, was the idea that from when parenting books were first written in like the 1700s up until about the 1950s, the attitude was, you, the parent, must break your child's will. You must break the child's will so that they will become obedient to authority, because that is the best attitude for a successful life. Now, remember, we're coming from a time of kings and queens, people who have absolute authority and can say off with his head. And, you know, you go back farther and, you know, even here in the United States, live in the 1700s and in the 1800s, we had slavery in which one human being owns another and they have power of life and death. So if you're in a system where the master has absolute authority over whoever's below, if you're raising your kid to be the one below, they'd better be obedient to authority. So if you break their will, they become more obedient, or at least apparently obedient. Enduring pattern. Right? Somewhere in the 1950s and then the 1960s, with the whole human rights movement, civil rights movement, voting rights, sexual revolution, the whole society, certainly in the United States, and I believe in Europe also, began to shift towards, okay, your aim is not just to be an obedient member of society, it is to become your individual self. That reverses the whole equation. Now your job is to become your authentic self, even if that means you're being disobedient. So, as I understand it, the parenting books from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and on, that slowly, maybe, gradually, I'm not sure, but there was a general change from you must break your child's will to you must support your child in developing a healthy will.
Mm.
So then we get completely different societies.
Mm.
And we get a society today where people don't just want to go to their MD or their therapist and be told by the authority, oh, you have this malady and you should take this drug or do this action, whatever, or we'll cut you open and remove whatever and that'll fix you.
Mm.
They want to heal themselves, right? Whole different attitude.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, there's certainly some pretty major shifts happening. I mean, little strands of things I noticed from what you're saying was, I mean, I think also with this kind of oral time or the first year of life, there's something going on with authority. I don't know. I don't really fully understand it, but I was in Thailand quite a lot in the 90s and speaking a little bit of the language and knowing people. And I noticed that the average Thai of my age group then, or a bit younger, I was in my 30s then, was that they had no issues with authority. I mean, if authority could have said, or they had no manifest opposition to authority, it seemed quite normal for them to just do what the government said or what the teacher said or whatever. They didn't really seem to, as far as I could tell, they didn't seem to give other options a kind of any shrift in their own mind. And I guess I developed the opinion that this must be because, or perhaps a little bit later when I got more into therapy and things like this, I developed the opinion it must be something to do with the way they're bonding with the mother in very early infancy, that they, because I imagine you've just been inside your mum, you've been, even the same being for quite a while, and then you're slowly becoming separate. And then I guess ideally what you want is a very gradual withdrawal from the mother after you're born. And perhaps in the West, it was more characteristic that the mother would go off and do her thing, and you don't have this very close physical contact for a year and a half or so or two until this self at a psychological level begins to develop. And that perhaps this, probably quite healthy and tribal based kind of way of bringing up kids it seemed to not give them so many issues with authority. I mean, I don't know if that's true, but I mean, that was what it looked like. It made me think a lot because I had a lot of issues with authority, and I was very much one who, during the kind of endurer phase, or the phase when trying to assert my individuality, what I did essentially was go along physically, but just not surrender mentally, which is, it's quite a common strategy, and then I developed a huge need for a kind of autonomy in some ways, which would very easily feel in my own mind as though it was being challenged by pretty much anyone telling me what to do, essentially. And it left me really struggling actually with work for many, many years. To just work in any kind of normal hierarchical structure was not at all easy for me. I mean, I got through it at some point, but I don't know. I mean, I'm just a little few threads from what you're saying, but it's stuff that interested me a lot. And without getting too political or anything, I see with all these measures that go on from the pandemic and stuff, a lot seems to perhaps come back to this era. I don't really know or understand fully, but like that if kids have this very strong, close bond with the mother, then would they even? I mean, I don't know. They seem quite happy to be told what to do, it seems, though. But then my mind kind of thinks, well, couldn't that all go wrong and they get told bad things? I don't know. Anyway, I don't know if you.
Well, I think you bring up some really interesting ideas here. Let me go through a couple of responses. One is we're talking about the West versus the East, Asia. And in the West, we have taken, especially in the United States, we've taken the idea of the individual being more important than the collective, than the community. We've taken that as far as you can. And many would say way too far. Whereas in Asia, China, Thailand, in those cultures, the common wisdom is the community is more important than the individual. It's fine to be an individual, but it's not okay to screw things up for everybody else. So there's that difference. Different attitude towards authority. Sort of automatic compliance versus automatic rebellion. Then there's the issue of, like you were saying, bonding with the mother, physical contact, and the development of trust in other people. In the developmental stages, as I laid them out in my book, the last two are trusting others and then trusting yourself. And if you develop a trust in other people, then when someone else, including someone in authority, says, I think you should do this, you don't automatically rebel against that, right? You think, well, they could be right. I believe they have my best interest at heart, right? And the thing you notice about Thailand being held and nursed for, say, the first year and a half. I remember reading something about, I think this had something to do with Emily Conrad Daoud's work on the Continuum Project, or her living among tribes in South America. And she said she lived in a tribal situation where the baby was always physically held by some older person for 4 years. That baby was never put down alone until they were 4 years old. And it was often skin to skin. So the warmth, the pulsing of the heartbeat and all that. And my sense is that if the baby develops a strong bond and a strong trust, then in attachment terms, we have secure attachment. In developmental stage terms, we have strong trust in others. So then the attitude towards authority is completely different. It's like, well, I believe that you actually do have my best interest and all of our best interests at heart. So I'm going to listen to what you have to say. Whereas here in the United States, we have very much the opposite. We watch couples, young couples, preparing for their first child. And in most cases, the first thing they do is assign a separate room to be the baby's room. As soon as possible, that baby is going to be left alone all night. I'm not sure that's good for human babies. I don't know how long or what kind of contact is necessary for optimal psychological development. But we all remember, like, the discoveries of, quote, hospitalism from, the 1920s or whatever, that, if you take an infant born out of wedlock, left in the hospital and not touched for 2 weeks, they die. Like, yeah, human beings need contact with human beings. So I think, here in the US, we've taken this independence thing too far. The country is founded on the Declaration of Independence, not the Declaration of Interdependence. I'm much more in favor of interdependence, in which, as parents, we recognize this baby needs us. And different babies maybe for different lengths of time, but it's important that we give the child a solid foundation of feeling safe. Safety, belonging, held in love.
Thank you.
And then maybe we don't need to be so rebellious.
I mean, what I find most at the moment, what I've been finding most interesting about this concept, and making the idea of, like, if it was possible in the West to make early years of child's life better, is that when we consider kind of civilization, so to speak, or certainly post 1500 or whatever, a lot of it is kind of based around the development of technology and machinery and machines and stuff like this, and the reality is that that's predominantly been created, at least initially, in the West, and the spur does seem to have been the fact that the kids were brought up in quite a traumatizing way in some ways. So there's a kind of, I don't know, there's a strange kind of dual, I can't quite remember the right phrase for it, but a kind of push-pull thing going on where we've created some incredible technology and had huge advances in all sorts of fields, but on a kind of core psychological level, perhaps they've emanated out of these kind of rather disconnecting child rearing practices where a certain charge of energy is there in the psyche of a developing child and the adult, and then that's kind of channeled into some pursuit where perhaps Einstein wouldn't have bothered with the theory of relativity if he'd had an absolutely optimal infancy, or I don't know Einstein's or anything like that, but I'm not specifically picking on him, but I don't know. It's kind of it's a strange kind of area for me where I feel like there needs to be a bit more discussion somewhere out in the open. These things relate, so that we can kind of, instead of just continuing to charge in what appears to me to be a bit of a kind of increasingly disconnecting from the body kind of way, instead of doing that, saying how can we reconcile we've created amazing technology and can do all sorts of things that we could never do before, and we can extend human life much better and keep people well, and they don't have to suffer so much from so many illnesses and complaints and whatever, and travel to the moon and this kind of thing, but this has been done not through some miracle of being sort of white or Western, but through a certain part of it has come through the child rearing practices. Possibly you could say there's a certain objectivity in the mindset that may be more genetic thing. I don't know, but I mean, I don't know. Somewhere I'd love to see a bit of reconciling of all of this, so that we could try and move forwards in some kind of coherent direction. I don't know exactly. Yeah.
I think you're pointing to something really important. In that, let me kill an incoming call here. If we look at the shift in human culture from tribal culture, hunter-gatherer tribal culture, to herding cultures, to feudal Europe, in which the serfs are bound to the land, to the Industrial Revolution, leaving the land and going to work in factories, and then the shift from factory physical labor to mental labor, going to work in offices. There's a steady progression. If we think of it in terms of energetics, there's a steady shift from having a strong energetic connection between the individual and the ground, a strong grounding into the earth, to less and less grounding, to the point of people not being grounded at all. If you're living in a high-rise apartment building on the 50th floor, it's a little harder to energetically connect to the earth than it is if you're living in a hut with a dirt floor and you walk on it on bare feet. And children learn energetic grounding from their parents, like we learn everything from our parents. It's a body-to-body transfer of knowledge by imitation. It's a templating. And if your parents were energetically grounded, had a strong sense of core, strong sense of energetic edge, your body just learned those skills from them the same way you learned to speak whatever your mother tongue was, right? My parents spoke English. I grew up speaking English. I never thought about it. It never occurred to me to speak Chinese. Similarly, my parents, neither of them, were energetically grounded. I had no clue about this.
Mm.
I had no idea what this was. Nobody in the neighborhood where I grew up was energetically grounded that I knew of. They worked in offices.
Mm.
So those of us who have grown up in the developed world don't have this inherent advantage from the people who really are bound to the land. And I mean energetically connected. I don't mean legally required. I mean energetically connected to the earth. They have a familiarity and a sense of belonging that we lack.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really important. So I completely agree with you that as we've had these technological advancements, we've also lost some very important energetic skills.
Mm.
Now, the skills were unconscious, but in a tribal society, everybody understands grounding.
Mm.
And, when the Westerner walks in, I mean, Americans have been well known around the world as kind of rude, crude, ill-mannered people when going to more tribal societies and more less developed, going to India, Asia, places like that. And I think part of that has been that Americans in particular didn't have any energetic manners. We had never been taught, you keep your energy in your space. You don't just flood everybody else's space with your energy.
Mm.
And to my way of thinking, learning these basic energetic skills is actually required for becoming a healthy adult.
Mm.
But we here in the United States, and perhaps in Europe also, in our highly developed cultures, have completely forgotten these skills,
Mm.
don't teach them,
Mm.
and then wonder what's going on.
Mm.
And my experience as a psychotherapist has been in the last 20 years since I started learning and using these skills, a very high percentage of the people who come to see me as clients, who come with what they believe is a psychological problem, in fact have an energetic skill problem.
Mm.
Like they come with a statement of, "Oh, I just don't know how to say no. I'm, I don't know what to say or what to think. I try to be all things to all people, and that kind of doesn't work out. And I can't figure out how to live."
Mm.
The person is missing core.
Mm.
They're missing ground. They're missing an energetic edge. They're missing this energy skill called me, not me, which is a way of cleaning out your own space so that instead of having everybody else's ideas about who you should be in your own space informing you, you only have your own energy, your
Mm.
own thoughts and feelings and energies in your own space.
Mm. Mm.
Until you get those four basic skills down, you can't reference yourself and find out, well, what do I feel about this? What do I want? What is my preference? Do I like this or not like this? Who am I? You know, I can know who you are. Being
Mm.
able to reference someone else's core is a great skill. But if I can only reference other people and not reference myself, the only view I have of myself is the way they see me.
Mm.
Does that make sense? That was a
Yeah.
whole
Yeah.
long thing.
Yeah. I think it would be so great. I mean, all I'm thinking is, if so much of this was included in the average kind of psychotherapist's way of being, but yeah, I don't want to harp on, but I mean, sometimes it seems
Absolutely
like
agree.
we're just kind of
I found that teaching clients basic energy skills solves a great many of their so-called psychological problems.
mm, mm, mm. Absolutely. What kind of so I'm interested, what kind of techniques would you give someone? You're allowed to say if someone came and it seemed clear to you that they were not really grounded or that they didn't have an adequate sense of boundary. What kind of
Yeah. Yeah. So these are all attentional skills, skills of attention, where you put your attention, and gaining voluntary control over where you put your attention. So in all the meditation practices that are taught, this is the underneath part that is usually not mentioned. They're usually saying, okay, what we want you to do is focus on the sensation of your breath coming into your nose and down your throat. Or we want you to focus on your third eye. Or we want you to focus on your dantian. Or we want you to focus on a sound, a mantra, or a posture, a mudra, or an image or something. We want you to put your attention somewhere, and you end up thinking that the main event is the object of attention, where you're putting your attention, when in fact, the big teaching is just being able to control where you put your attention in the first place. Because the problem that we all have from childhood is our attention is flitting and is outside our voluntary control. It just goes to the brightest object and the loudest sound and anything moving and color. And that runs our life. And of course, advertisers know this. Editors of TV shows and movies know this. They edit them, to hold our attention. So the first thing is just to notice we're practicing gaining voluntary control over where you put your attention. And people have also studied this in many other ways besides meditation. If you practice shooting baskets for basketball, you stand there at the free throw line and you shoot 100 baskets, you are putting your attention right here. This body, these feet, this hand, right? If you're practicing piano, if you're singing, if you're drawing, you're putting your attention somewhere and keeping it there. That's the main skill. And to my way of thinking, the most important skill a person can ever learn in their whole life. Mastering your attention, bringing it under your voluntary control is the key to controlling your experience in life, making it the way you want. So that's the first thing. Then more specifically, the first skill I would typically teach someone is called core. Core being a column from the crown of your head, right, straight down through your body to your perineum. And what's important about that is that's the part of your body where you are the most you. That's where the answers to your questions are. If you're interested in, do I want chocolate or vanilla? Do I want to take this job? Do I want to marry this person? The answer is not in your left hand. The answer is not in your ear. The answer is not in your foot. The answer is in your core. What you need to learn to do is to put your attention and hold your attention on the core of your body so that you can reference it. So that you can hold a simple choice like, do I want chocolate or vanilla? And compare them and get, so what's the feeling? If I say, okay, I'm going to have chocolate, what's the feeling in my core? I'm going to have vanilla. What's the feeling now? Signal from inside. You're learning the language of your body as it speaks to you, the signals from inside. Then you start to know yourself. Okay? So learning core, and there's an easy doorway to that known as centering breath. I won't go into that now. But core is finding yourself. Grounding is finding support. Learning that you're not alone here, that the earth actually is an energetic being, is an alive intelligence, is friendly, is glad you're here, that you belong, that you have a place. You don't have to fight for your spot. That infinite amounts of energy are available to you. You can ask for them. If you have energy in your body you don't like, you can send it down into the ground. You can regulate your inner state. Edge is like we all took high school biology, I'm assuming, and we learned about cells, and that every cell has protoplasm, and it has a cell membrane around that protoplasm. And the job of the cell membrane is to regulate what comes in and what goes out. And the what comes in part is really important, because if poison is allowed to come into the cell will die, right? The idea of having an energetic edge, and this is different from psychological boundaries, but it's similarly important. Two different things, psychological boundary and energetic boundary, different things, but both important. In the energetic boundary, it's like you install a filtering mechanism, because again, it's intelligent. You can talk to it. It's part of you, and you can tell it, I want you to let in only what is good for me. Don't be letting into my space, my bubble, everybody else's ideas about who I should be. Because they all have ideas, of course. You know, everybody wants you to be a certain way. Everybody who's close to you. You can't stop that, and it's okay. They have their desires. But the point is, you don't have to take that into your space and then get confused about what part is me and what part is not me. You can have just your own life energy in your bubble with you. That makes things clearer. And that brings us to the fourth energy skill, which is the skill of me, not me, which is literally about cleaning out your space. It's about energetic hygiene. Because you can't be perfect about never letting anybody else's stuff in. And if you're just starting out, probably most of the stuff in here is from somewhere else. So it's a cleaning house project. And for many people starting out, they need to do it not just every day, but maybe, 5 times a day. Because if other people's energetic junk is floating in, that's confusing. Because you have an energy in your system, in your space, that says, oh, I should be nice to Barbara. Barbara wants me to be nice to her. I should be in love with Barbara, right? And that may be a very true thing. Barbara wants me to be in love with her. But that's not the answer to the question of, am I in love with Barbara? That comes from me, right? So if I have Barbara's desire that I'm in love with her in here with me, then I can't tell what's me and what's not. Is this making sense?
Yeah.
So this is about energetic hygiene. And I think psychology has made a mistaken diagnosis known as the highly sensitive person. Because in general psychology, we have not understood the importance of an energetic boundary and of me, not me, and of core. So somebody decided that people who don't have the protection of a filtering mechanism and therefore are getting everybody else's junk coming in and overwhelming them are extra sensitive, when in fact we're all very sensitive. The problem here is lacking a boundary. So I wouldn't want to take the position that there's no variation in sensitivity at all between people. I don't know if that's true. But I would take the position that here again, psychology has taken a symptom, labeled it as a trait, and told people that this is indigenous to them and it's actually part of their identity. And what I'm saying is, no, it's not part of your identity. It's mostly the result of a lack of a very important skill. You can learn the skill, and then other people's energies will not overwhelm you the same way. You will become a more resilient human being.
I mean, I remember myself, I lived and worked a long time in the Spirit Osho place, and with a lot of people coming through, and you get a lot of the underside of a spiritual community is the kind of oral side, manifesting as spiritual fascinations and fascinations with oneness and this kind of thing. But
especially an Osho community.
Especially an Osho community.
As opposed to, say, Zen,
Yes. Zen. And but one of the things slightly relating to this, but not entirely, was I would regularly meet people who I'd be holding a sharing, and someone is speaking about this need to kind of keep a lot of barriers up around certain kinds of people because they found their energy overwhelming. So that was a regular thing that I would hear from people. And usually when they started to work with anger, because we were quite, I absolutely hear what you're saying with the energetic work and understanding like this is important. My background more was screaming and shouting, body work, bioenergetics, this kind of a more heavy end of the scene, so to speak, perhaps. And as soon as someone worked a bit more with anger and had a bit more base or a sense of opening the base, then it seemed like a natural sense of boundaries was there. And they did not have to actually avoid the people they were avoiding because they had a natural kind of boundary that they discovered. There was certainly for quite a while, quite a lot of people like that. And generally in those kind of areas, I find a lot of people with quite a strong heart connection, but often quite ungrounded. And my way of perceiving grounding may be a little different. It was more like I became aware of a circuit from the belly down through the legs to the soles of the feet. And if I cleared certain muscular energetic blockages out of that, then there was this sense that, for me, I can quite easily zip off and go wildly off around the place. But if I feel something alarming is happening, or I catch myself and it's important to do so, I find it fairly easy just to come back and be present through having the circuit at least partially functioning. And that was also something I noticed, that there was a kind of default tendency to, in the same way that psychologists can default on kind of introspecting on childhood as the kind of go-to strategy to find the source or way of treating any kind of problem. It's a little bit similar with very heart-centered people and it is, it's absolutely wonderful to be able to open the heart and to introspect on what's not working and feel, to be able to be vulnerable. But I certainly noticed at some point I felt that there was an over reliance on that, or not so much a reliance, but a fixation on that, and an absence of basic grounding, and whether we could just be on the earth. And so, these communities can become very, very soft and loving and beautiful, but kind of a little bit, disconnected in a way. I remember one in France that was more of a Buddhist thing, but it got really like that from some of the people I knew. It was, very interesting social experiments as well, but kind of somewhere just pointing to a basic need to be grounded and heartful, like heart, mind, belly, with a kind of a simple way that I see of, if I can get those centers more open or alleviate a blockage in one, or someone who's overly open in one and lacking another, then I'm doing a lot of good for that person.
Yeah, I think all teachings and all growth communities share a difficulty in that frequently the teacher and the teaching coalesces around some new technique or discovery, and then that is intensely explored, and maybe the first generation, the lead teacher and maybe the teachers around that person had other experiences before they got here, so they have a kind of a broader deck of cards, if you will, of other techniques and understandings. But then when you get to second and third generation, they just grew up in this community and they think this is the one way to deal with everything. And it creates a kind of blindness. And so if your technique is successful, after a while you start to suffer from thinking this is the answer to everything. And I don't know any way to prevent that.
Mm.
except just to be aware of it and remind each other, about, yeah, this is really good
Mm.
for XYZ problem, but there's more to the world.
Mm. Mm.
And in terms of what you were saying at the beginning of what you were talking about there, in terms of feeling overwhelmed. Yeah, so there's one side of the puzzle is a person not having strong enough boundaries to be able to protect themselves. And the other side of the puzzle is, for aggressive pattern, the safety strategy is to pull up more energy than other people can tolerate, because you got a bigger energy flow, and throw it at them and basically beat them into submission and compliance by putting them into overwhelm.
Mm.
So, the other half of the equation is for people who use the psychopath aggressive pattern strategy to learn energy manners and learn not to do that.
Mm.
That's actually abusive to the other people.
Mm.
It's not okay. Just like it's not okay to go up to somebody and just hit them,
Mm.
right? It's not okay to do that energetically either.
Mm.
So we've got, skills that need to be learned
Mm.
on both sides of the equation.
Mm. And to allow vulnerability is what I usually. I mean, you don't get so many aggressive clients, because I can think of one or two, and I can see certain traits of mine in that. But I certainly developed once I cleared a little bit of my oral patterns. I became quite in that for a while, and it has its uses, of course, as well. But I mean, just having, because of course, when someone who's got this aggressive pattern is doing this, bringing energy up and putting it to the front, basically, they're doing it as a reaction to something that's going on around them, and that reaction
It's a
usually.
safety strategy.
Sorry.
It's a safety strategy. They're
Yes,
trying to feel safer.
it's
not aware that they're scared inside.
Yeah.
But trying to feel safer.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of I mean, this is one of the things that's so kind of fascinating, and also probably one of the most debilitating factors about being human, is that so many safety strategies are essentially initiated unconsciously, and and so we may not be aware of something that is triggering us, but I think they call it neuroception now. But at a deeper level, something is being activated, and then, I mean, to finish off just what I was saying, was when someone with that aggressive pattern actually has experienced much more comfort around vulnerability and not being in control, then it can be that kind of that pattern starts to kick in, but it doesn't quite come right up, because it's like, oh, well, actually, even if it all goes wrong and I end up being wrong, and it doesn't matter, it's okay. I'm only human, and this kind of experience comes. But I've certainly spotted somewhere that just almost like there are bugs in the human brain in terms of how we are now, and this tendency to go into a pattern pretty much unconsciously is it's kind of like it can end up in certain world situations so debilitating, I think, that people are just triggered and not really aware that they're triggered, or that they're going into strategies, and things just accelerate very quickly.
Do you mean character structure patterns?
I mean, any kind of essentially defensive strategy, really, that's kind of that can be invoked from a deeper level of our psyche. This deceptive, and of course that includes things where we have a particular holding around a certain feeling or something from the past. It's like the hypersensitivity remains in child state. It doesn't develop in adulthood. So the kind of reactivity that we with the strategy that we may have needed as a 2-year-old, it may not be necessary anymore, but it's still being invoked. It's still being invoked, rather like a kind of those Japanese soldiers who were still fighting the war like 40 years after it had finished. I don't know if some years.
Yeah. And I think this has been true of human beings forever. I don't think it's anything new. we have sort of discovered it more in the last 100 years in psychology and psychotherapy, this idea that most of us are still treating the entire world as if it's our parents, and we are unconsciously using the same strategies, the same methods of trying to feel safer that worked for us at 3 years old and 4 years old and 5 years old, even when we're 55 and 80. And as with any automatic conditioned into the body response, it doesn't necessarily work well in the current situation because we're not present and we're not composing a response to the present. We're caught in some response from the past that's automatic and that is fueled by the trauma from the past. So my sense is that in order to get out of pattern, a person needs to do two things. One is learn energetic skills, and the other is clear out of the body the old traumas from the past. Mm. And there are lots of different methods for doing that. Mm. But the big problem in talk therapy for 100 years has been that we haven't had in traditional talk psychology any method of actually clearing trauma out of the body. Mm. So we could talk about it and we could do terrific detective work, but we couldn't really change anything. Mm. Mm. And changing it is the name of the game. That's what frees people.
Mm. Mm. It's kind of, it reminds me something very interesting is this kind of, we were chatting a little bit before we pushed record, the kind of slightly inharmonious relationship between modern neuroscience and traditional psychology with its kind of Freudian concepts of the unconscious. And it would be so kind of great to find, because people often ask me from the work I'm doing, which is mostly getting their body to go in position and to breathe horizontally and feel the body, is there any kind of scientific evidence for this stuff?
Right.
Outside of the subjective sciences, such as doing some kind of personal stress assessment subjectively to start with and trying it later, which might reveal something. Mm-hmm. Nevertheless, as far as I know, in neurology and psychology, very little that points to, what's really going on, say, with something like the original character structure, where you look at someone's posture, mm-hmm. maybe perhaps their neck is craning a little forwards, mm-hmm. trying to grasp connection, or the nipple or something like that, but there doesn't seem to be an underlying neurological or modern scientifically accepted theory that ties together, the concept of trauma with some really measurable bodily response. I mean, there's certainly much more widespread acceptance of it, and people like Bessel van der Kolk, the body keeps the score, polyvagal theory, which is a little more outside, I think, but it kind of really lacks. Because I work with the body and I get on quite well with sort of scientific people because they like that, because it's physical, as opposed to some of the more new age or spiritual ideas. But nevertheless, there's nothing that can really be pointed at that you can say, okay, this is proof, and as soon as you refer to something like the unconscious mind, then of course their tendency, maybe not always, but their tendency is a little bit, they're out of there, or they're kind of rolling their eyes a little bit and this kind of thing. So and I understand, it's sometimes science has become also quite motivated by, or it's financed by groups who want to make money, as as part of it. And so there may not be so much incentive to really study these things deeply, but it would be great if there was some kind of more sort of scientific grounding for concepts like this.
Mm-hmm. It seems to me that the fundamental difficulty here is a misunderstanding of science. That the word science, or the use of scientific method, is being confused with physical materialism. Scientific method is a process, a methodology mm-hmm. for exploring the world and theorizing what's going on and testing the theories. It's a method of investigation, but it's not limited in what can be investigated. In physical materialism, that is a belief that the physical world of time and space and matter and energy is the one and only world. There is no other world, and we should not look beyond that. Thinking that physical materialism is science has given physical materialism an authority that it doesn't deserve. It's as if in the days when everybody knew that the earth was flat, someone said, well, I'm not so sure the earth is flat. I mean, I've noticed this weird thing that, like when a ship is sailing away, like the hull disappears first, but I can still see the sails. And I think maybe that means something about the earth isn't flat. Maybe the earth is curved. And then the other people saying, you're not being scientific. You're not allowed to think about that. Shut up. If you look at modern science, unquote, you see allopathic medicine. You see neuropsychology exclusively focused on there must be an explanation in the physical body. We will look at neurons. We will look at electricity. We will look at chemical transmission. There is a complete disregard for the possibility that there is an energy world and an energy body, and that what you're looking for is actually happening in the energy body. So in Chinese medicine, for instance, you have acupuncture and meridians, which is a whole science of investigation using scientific method, which has investigated the energy body and the channels that energy moves through in the energy body, the meridians. That is widely disregarded in the West. And it seems to me that the problem, I don't know if you ever saw a movie years and years and years ago called Flatland. And this was a sort of short science documentary. And the idea was, if instead of 3 dimensions, you have only 2 dimensions, like length and width, and no thickness at all, then you cannot explain a phenomenon that originates in the 3rd dimension. If a pencil comes down through your flat plane and pierces it, magic has happened. Suddenly, a pencil has appeared, a point of lead, and then lead surrounded by wood has appeared in your flat dimension, and you will run around and try to find out, how did this possibly happen? And you'll never figure it out. Because you cannot consider the possibility of the 3rd dimension. And my proposal is that most of the insistence that we find, quote, scientific proof is coming from people who are pretty deeply caught in physical materialism. They are conflating that with scientific method. And they think unless you can find a physical world mechanism for how this is happening, it couldn't be happening. So we have terrific technologies of the physical world. I mean, computers and all this video stuff we're using right now, fantastic technology. If you go to Tibet, they have a technology of consciousness. It's a completely different technology. It is an exploration over thousands of years of the phenomenon of consciousness. And they know stuff about it that is amazing. Similarly, in Chinese medicine, with acupuncture and the meridians and all of that, I haven't studied that in any great depth, but they have an understanding of the energy world. Similarly in Qigong, which is, use of energy. These things appear to be either magical or impossible if you think the world is only the physical world. If you think that the physical world is all of the world, there are no other dimensions, no other possibilities, don't even look. So I think, there's a big blindness happening in, quote, modern science, modern psychology, neuropsychology. I'm sure they're discovering some terrific stuff in the physical realm. But if they're trying to explain everything that happens in the physical realm, they're not going to be able to explain stuff that has its origin in a different realm. And I would propose that trauma, for instance, is not actually held in the physical body. It's more fundamentally held in the energy body. It's a disruption of the flow of energy in the energy body. And more, that the energy body actually creates the physical body and sustains the physical body. So if there's a screw up in the energy body, the physical body sooner or later gets sick.
Yeah. I mean, I hear that, and,
that's a big case.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've been around the alternative scene, so for sure. I remember a chap, I think, in Stanford, William Tiller, many years ago, who was he was into, I don't know if he's still around or if he's passed away now, but he was super into all of this stuff many years ago. But I was always, because I understand, I see that, and some scientists are quite open to look at other things, I think, and then some not, and then you've also got a kind of bulwark these days of kind of people who kind of term themselves skeptics, who would just get a sort of psychological reward by confronting anyone with anything that isn't purely physical and telling them it's just pure quackery. And
if you don't agree with me, you must be wrong, and I must
they kind of get a sort of dopamine hit out of going on Twitter or whatever and just kind of running down anything, and that kind of thing. But all of that regardless, what I see working, because I work very physically, I will engage in client stories and this kind of thing, but it's more really just kind of getting into the physical things. And nevertheless, it will be like, yes, it may well be that there's a higher dimensional body, and that's the main area where transformation is taking place, and then it feeds back down to the three-dimensional body or whatever. Nevertheless, there are changes notable happening in the physical body, and I'm kind of a little surprised we don't have any, I don't know, maybe there is, but I haven't noticed any kind of real scientific, explanation for that. They are researching an organ of the brain called the insula now, which was overlooked vastly for a very long space of time. And that is to do with the degree to which we can feel our body, basically. Which has always been, so that was kind of interesting to me, but I don't know, I haven't really chased up any of the research so much, but I heard about it, but I've believed for some time.
It's an old problem. If you're looking in the wrong place, you won't find what you're looking for.
Well, I have a suspicion that we might find, I have a feeling that we might find some useful stuff in neuroscience. It just hasn't quite got there yet. That's my intuition, or maybe it's just me being hopeful.
Some useful stuff is very different from the fundamental answer to the question being posed.
But I mean, something when we talk about grounding, another way I see it a little bit is, or psychological health, for example, is the degree to which an individual can feel their body consciously, in many ways represents their degree of psychological health. That's a kind of concept I tend to
correlation, correlation,
because generally when something is repressed, it's repressed out of awareness. I mean, that's the basic definition of repression. And
that's the point of repression.
That's the point. Yeah, you don't have to feel it. Exactly.
That's the whole idea.
If you can feel it again and integrate that into your felt sense of a body, then you have passed through something. And it strikes me, I don't know, I mean, it strikes me that that process might be being mediated physically, and we just haven't quite got around to understanding it yet. But I mean, I'm hopeful in the next 10, 20 years, maybe something like that does happen with the insula or with some other part of the brain, where they find out that there is an organ of the brain that's kind of regulating somewhere how much of your body you can actually feel,
Yeah.
And that brings in a lot of psychology, I think, because if you can't feel your lower back or your backbone, you will tend to either get very controlling from the mind, or cling on to people, just cling on to them, because you're not aware in your own felt sense of the body that you have support as an actual physical sensation. If it's not present, or if you don't feel your belly, you don't feel your instinctive kind of fiery defensive capacity that's just there. You don't have to use it, but if something bad happens, you can just use it, So that's a little bit more the kind of psychological map I've developed personally. And I don't know, it would be lovely to see some kind of progress and just some greater acceptance for some of these ideas, and maybe that leads to more. I don't know. I guess with the field I'm in, I just saw that seemed a little bit more possibility than some of the more alternative theories, which may be even more valid, but which are just very difficult sometimes in today's world for people to believe in. I mean, I guess how I see most people.
We believe what we've been told to believe.
Yeah.
Right. So it seems to me that in many ways, Western medicine, and by extension, much of Western psychology, is stuck in the same place that medieval medicine was before the invention of the microscope. Before anybody had invented the microscope and they could take a drop of water from the river or a drop of blood from the person's body and see, oh, look, there's a bacterium here, and this particular bacterium causes that disease. And if the bacteria are in the water and you drink the water, you get the disease. And if the bacteria are not in the water, you can drink the water, you don't get the disease. There is a direct cause and effect relationship, but until you have a microscope, you can't see the bacterium, so you don't know it exists. So before that, what were the explanations for disease? Ill humors on the night air. A small toad or a dwarf living in your intestines. You were born under a bad sign, right? Your parents failed to give sacrifice at the altar of the necessary gods at the time of your birth. These are all attempts to explain, and they're the best we can do until we develop the microscope and we could look at the water, look at the blood, and see, oh, look at this. There's an identifiable cause. And we can run tests and we can discover, cholera has a cause. We can stop it. We can start it. If you give a person this water to drink, they get cholera. And we're stuck in the same place today, not because our technology is lacking, but because we've been so beguiled by machine technology that we no longer trust human perception. And one of the main things about perception of the energy world is it happens through the human being. Right? Like a person who's sensitive can feel the meridians, can find them. A person who's sensitive, like visually sensitive to auras, can simply look at someone else's aura and see what's going on and say, oh, look, you have this problem here. We need to fix that. But you can't, so far, we haven't succeeded in building a machine that can do that. And since the Industrial Revolution, our society has become so romantically attached to machines that we have come to believe that unless a machine can measure it, it can't be true. I remember beginning to study physics at MIT and unconsciously having the belief that I can't personally know anything directly. There's no wisdom that can come through me. It all comes from books, from other people who studied, who had the machines, who, the people who run the accelerator in CERN, Switzerland, and stuff like that.
Mm.
Instead of knowing something that is also true, it's not a substitute, it's just also true, which tribal people have known for centuries, which is you can train your body to sense, to feel.
Mm.
In a hunting-gathering culture, they have to be on personal good terms with the animals.
Mm.
They have to be able to feel, oh, the herd is coming. In 4 days, the herd will get here. We need to get our stuff together and get out to that place where we're going to be able to actually capture some animals and kill them and eat them.
Mm.
The San Bushmen in the Kalahari Desert are known for their abilities in perceiving beyond, normal human capacities. They just train in it.
Mm.
So what I'm proposing is that the technology has given us something, but it's also caused us to lose something.
Mm.
And that is a faith in personal learning and in direct discovery. A shaman from a tribal society wants to find a cure for whatever disease is happening. The shaman goes to the plants and he sits with an individual plant and he says, who are you and what do you have for us? Can you help me here?
Mm.
He treats the plant as an intelligent ally being. He doesn't decide to cut the plant down, grind it up, mash it, and put it through a spectrometer to discover what are the molecular ingredients in the plant, and then test those individually. He asks the plant itself.
Well, they do chop the plants up, Shaman. I mean, but they don't put them in a spectrometer. I mean, they use them surely
But
as
that's what the pharmaceutical companies
basically for.
Pardon me?
They seem to use. I mean, I had some experience with iboga and ayahuasca, and they seem to.
Yeah, they'll prepare them in a certain way.
But they use them as a kind of gateway, in a sense, to a different realm where they can get some information, or whether you're taking them as getting some information just as a straight kind of download, or they become aware of something that's really deficient in them that they're not consciously able to access.
Yeah. That the plants are allies.
Yeah.
That the animals are allies. What if the entire world is alive? It's aware of you and me and can be friends with us. Now, by friends, I don't mean that they all deliver cupcakes to our door. The river will still drown you if you disregard the fact that the current is too strong. It's not personal. But what if there's an aliveness in a being? One of the things that I've discovered in energy class over the decades is I keep saying to my teacher, well, what about this? Is this true? Is that true? And she says, go and ask the field. And I go, damn, I wanted you to tell me. I don't want to have to go do it myself. Okay, so, I, in my less than super talented way, go and try to connect with that field and have a conversation. And see what can I learn directly from that field of intelligence, that field of awareness. And I would propose that, for instance, with character structure, there is a whole field of the legacy of character structure, of the, all that's known there. And millions of other fields.
Yeah.
And if you can go and learn directly, not as a substitute for going to high school or college or anything, but in addition.
Mm,
It's a completely different relationship
mm,
with existence and with experience, right?
totally, totally.
Yeah. And so then you and I, as practitioners working with a client, can try to find out, so what's going on here? What is needed? I mean, one of the things I've learned, I use energy psychology. I don't use Reichian treatment methods. I use the tapping process, emotional freedom technique. Um, Part of what I've learned is me being smart is not helpful.
Mm,
The client's body knows what it needs. The best thing I can do is be a good tracker.
mm,
Learn to follow the clues in the client's body to go where the energy is, find the charge, tap on the charge, clear the charge.
mm,
It's, in fairy tale terms, we're following the trail of breadcrumbs through the forest.
mm, mm. I mean, I guess one of the things I like about, I mean, I did a lot of group work, so one-to-one is a little bit new to me, and it's more something I've been doing since leaving community, and also with the lockdown and stuff on video apps. But it is nice to be in a different space. It is challenging for me sometimes just to come out of the mind and consciously come out and being in a workshop, working with people. It's not such an intellectual thing. I mean, you need at least enough intellect to kind of remember a little bit for the odd theory chat in the morning, but otherwise you're really intuitively working
Yeah.
with people in a group context as they feed off each other and as they trigger each other and as they, are simply themselves. So it's always a, I don't know, in a similar way, it's just a fantastic job to have, actually, because it's just so kind of personally revealing as well, and it creates
Yeah.
so much meaning, so much meaning for me, to see change in people, or to have people come back later and just be really thankful about something, or to see that they visibly shifted and are now no longer caught up in something they were caught up in before. It's just so humbling as well, but also it just feels so nourishing as someone working like that.
Yeah, I have the same experience that I find that very rewarding.
Mm,
To be there when the lights come on for somebody,
mm,
or when, in the metaphorically speaking, when they first get out of prison and they realize, well, wow, there's a whole other world out here,
mm,
and I can still go back into prison, and part of me wants to,
mm.
but the door was always open.
Yeah.
And like, okay, so how do I take one more step? That might be okay. It is, yeah. And I think of psychotherapy as a revolutionary activity
Mm,
because we are helping people become themselves,
mm,
not become obedient servants of authority,
mm,
but become themselves, become their own source of authority, their own author.
mm,
And ideally not the self in automatic rebellion against the authority. I don't see that as freedom at all. That's
mm,
just a different form of slavery. There's the slavery of um, compulsive compliance, I'll do whatever you want, and the slavery of compulsive rebellion and defiance. I'll do anything except what you want. I
mm,
will fight you at every turn. That's not freedom either.
mm.
I'm sure you've heard the statement about maturity starts when you discover. Um, oh, I forgot the exact quote now, but it's something about when you first discover that your parents were right about certain things.
Mm.
When you come out of that automatic teenage rebellion thing.
Yeah. Well, there's been a lot of it around. I mean, I had to learn totally new strategies when working a lot with people in their 20s,
Uh,
because, they basically, of course, I'm standing there at the front. I'm obviously the authority. So I'm the bad daddy, whether, I'm suddenly a representative of Donald Trump or their dad or whoever, and I need to be confronted and attacked, and so I had to learn a whole range of strategies, really, coming from allowing more vulnerability myself or giving more love myself, to also just sitting down and chatting about it also, and saying, because when I was training people to be able to teach something, it's like, I have to say to people, look, you cannot, a lot of people seem to have that age group, the expectation that just don't tell me anything, I know it already, so I'm like, I'm trying to train people, and their whole energy is like, no, I know it already, and because you're also working with empowerment, so that can be the first form that it takes when blocks come out. It's like, right, all daddies need to be hammered now, and
Right.
and so. And so you have to sit them down and say, look, you have to find a way that you can also learn something, and then they can relate to it when you can say it in an uncharged way, But it's certainly challenging, and I learned a lot from working with people in that age group, because you couldn't go about it the way I'd kind of learned, where there was a kind of very strict authoritarian structure and no one really dared challenge it. Now everything had changed, and I think it will be a challenge, for the coming generations in all sorts of fields, how to just learn stuff, because I never learned anything in my 20s or 30s. I was just in rebellion the whole time. I didn't learn one thing. I learned a lot about life and living on the street and things like that, but I didn't learn anything. And it wasn't until my 40s I started to do therapy myself, and then later got turned on to becoming a therapist. So, in a certain sense, I missed out on 20 years because I was just in such a trip, like, of knowing it all already,
Yeah, we get caught up in, it seems to me there are two forms of imprisonment or slavery. One is automatic compliance, and the other is automatic defiance. But for both of them, the point of reference is not me and what do I want. The point of reference is the authority. And what do they say? Who do they say I am? What do they say is true? And in working with people, I will say, look, instead of either slavish compliance or slavish defiance, rebellion against the authority, how about if you practice actually coming back to yourself and finding yourself? And inquiring into and exploring, well, what do you feel inside? What is your body saying to you? What is true for you? Right now, right here. Doesn't have to be true for anybody else, but for you. And something simple. I mean, I'm amazed at how many clients have to start with simple signals of, what's a yes versus a no? Am I hungry for lunch right now? Am I not hungry yet? How do I tell? What are the signals in my body? Where do I look? And what are the signals of what's a yes and what's a no? And what are the three different, centers of intelligence, head, heart, belly, completely different kinds of intelligence? And how do I learn how to ask the center that knows about this thing when I'm asking this thing? If you ask your head, do I love that person? You'll get a pros and cons assessment, useful. But the heart's answer is the answer you need. It's your heart who knows what you love and what you don't. And
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So do you just to?
I'm talking to you.
Yeah.
Time is getting away from us.
It's getting away from us, but we should wrap it up. So my girlfriend will come back from the gym soon and probably want to make a bit of a racket. But do you have any? I just want to just finish by asking you: do you have any more work that you're keen to bring out to the world, and like books or just generally that kind of thing? Any plans for the future of therapy line?
I've done a second online course. The first one was called Understanding Yourself and Understanding Others, which is basically just an online teaching about the material in the book. Because some people want to learn it, visually and auditorily. And there's a second online course that I taught about a year ago and recorded. And that is called How to Create a Self. And it's about learning the energetic skills. And it seems to me that Psychology has been wrestling for 100 years with this question of, well, how do you create a self? And I think psychology has never been able to find a satisfactory answer because, again, it's been looking in the wrong place. It's been looking in the realm of thoughts and feelings. And that's not where the self is. It's in the realm of energetic attention. So the course is about how to develop a felt sense of core, ground, edge, me, not me, several other energetic skills. So that's already on the website for the book. And then I plan to write a book from that course, a book called How to Create a Self. And then I want to write a book and teach a course that's just about this fundamental thing of training your attention. That the most important skill anybody can learn in their entire life is to voluntarily stabilize their attention, to be able to voluntarily control where is my attention right now, even though there's a sound over there that I'm kind of curious about, and there's a bright light here, and I have a thought about, oh, what am I going to have for lunch or whatever it is, to be able to keep attention where you want to keep it. Because it's just like the best metaphor for it I know of is watching television. If you change the channel, you get a different experience. If you watch the horror movie channel, you get scary stuff 24 hours a day. If you watch the Hallmark channel, you get love will save everybody 24 hours a day. Right? There are, you can think of habits of attention the same way we think of channels on television or radio stations. If you listen to a certain radio station, you hear whatever they're broadcasting, and you don't hear the other 100 radio stations. So where you tune your attention determines your experience in many, many ways. It doesn't make the rest of the world go away, but it completely changes your attitude toward it and your emotional interpretation of it. So that's, in terms of the future, that's going to be the third book and the third course. And I'm looking forward to that. I think that's really important.
Yeah. It sounds excellent, Stephen. So anyway,
Thank you for asking.
I'll stop recording there, but
okay.
Close the thing. It's just thank you so much for coming on and telling us all about your ideas. I think a lot of people will have gained a lot of value from and understanding from your talk. Thank you.
I hope so. Thanks for initiating it and inviting me. And thanks for all the work you put into creating these things. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.